Today, I want to challenge us to let us know that God gave us emotions for a reason. And actually, that many of us are either controlled by our emotions or through the spiritual fruit of self-control, our emotions leads us to godliness. Today, I'm going to be starting with an emotion that I've dealt with for most of my life. It's the emotion of anger. It's an emotion I think a lot of Koreans know very well. If you know something about Korean culture, we have very spicy food. We also have very spicy people. If you want to know how Korean people are, see the scene of an accident, right? See how people react when there is conflict. In the States, obviously, there would be, it will differ, right? Sometimes it will be a cordial encounter. Sometimes it will be a very strenuous one. But in Korea, on the most part, there's someone yelling or someone pointing the finger or someone just getting riled up and someone getting red in the face, if not both parties. And so anger is something I don't know if you really engage with, but anger is something that all of us in some shape or form, whether it is an event in our life or it is something every day that we might not feel at bursting, but we feel this simmer, right? This tension and this fire in our heart. We all deal with anger in a different way. And so today, through this message, and through the first example of anger in the Bible, I want to encourage us to not be controlled and swept away by the anger in our life, but through self-control, to live a passionate, powerful, and fruitful life. Can I get an amen? All right, so we're going to open our Bibles to Genesis chapter 4. We're going to be reading verse 1 through 16. Genesis chapter 4. Verse 1 through 16. And actually, I'm going to be reading it part by part, so I'm not going to be reading the whole thing. I'm going to be reading verse 1 through 5, 6 through 7, and then 8 through 16. So I'm going to read first the first component of verse 1 through 5 together. Let's read that together. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. And Abel also brought of the first fruit of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. So there's a lot to unpack in this passage. So this is chapter 4 of the book of Genesis. And so if you consider yourself Christian or you're interested in the Bible, every single one of us have read this passage. Because what do? We always start with the book of Genesis, right? Whether it be the beginning of the year, whenever we want to read the Bible, we do start with the book of Genesis. So maybe you read this passage tens of times, hundreds of times. And I wonder how much this passage strikes your heart. Many of us know this as a very famous story of Cain and Abel. And I'm sure some of you guys, if you heard a message on this, you were let known that Cain was not officially the first son and Abel was not officially the second. They could have been, but they could have been two of the many sons that Adam and Eve had. And through, we come to find that Cain was a farmer. Right? He toiled the ground, whereas Abel was a shepherd or someone that took care of a flock. So now the point of tension is that they both bring an offering to the Lord. Abel brings a sheep, right? And Cain brings fruit from the ground. But what is the point of contention? God accepted Abel's offering, but God did not accept Cain's. Why is the first question. If you really read this passage, you come to find, what does it exactly say? It says Abel brought what? firstborn of his flock. Whereas, what does it say about Cain? He brought to the Lord an offering of fruit of the ground. From here, you see the disparity. Number one, Abel brought his best, whereas Cain just picked something from one of the rest. You see, one thing that we have to know about God, even when we come into his presence here, is that God is all about our heart. And if not anything else, God sees our heart. This is something that needs to click in our minds and our hearts. Otherwise, the way we interact with God will be very surface level. Why? Because we will project what we see upon what God sees. And we will project what we think others see upon what God sees. And what other people see is what? They see our outer appearance. They see what we say. They might see our facial expressions. They see what we do in front of people. But technically, other people cannot see deep into our hearts. Even ourselves, we can't see that deeply into our hearts. Jeremiah 17:9 says what? The heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? How can we even know our own hearts? And yet, God pierces through what is in our hands, pierces through what we say, and he specifically looks at your and my heart when we engage with him in any single way, especially what we bring unto him. There is a reason why God rejected Cain's offering and accepted Abel's. It was not because I saw some people tell me it's because Cain gave fruit and Abel gave meat, right? That's a weird narrative of why God is very, he loves meat and that's why we're carnivores. It's so crazy what people say, what they take for this passage. But the reality is, God saw that Abel gave his very best. So he received it. You know what God does? It's like this. As a father, if my daughters give me something, I can't just take it. It must be given back to them, if not something that replicates multifold. And so we see that God continues to bless Abel even more because of the beauty of Abel's heart. What does Cain show us? He shows us that he just gave, maybe begrudgingly, maybe because of duty, maybe because he had to, but he did not give God his heart. So God could not accept it. And now we see what happens, Cain's reaction. How does Cain respond to God not receiving his offering? Cain gets angry. He gets very angry. And someone that has tackled and wrestled with the emotion of anger all my life, I can clearly say that anger is something that happens when we lose control of our world. It's when we lose control of how things should be or how things shouldn't be. And we lose control of our emotions because things are not going in the way, whether we think it is fair, it is suitable, or it's the way it should be. Anger explodes when we lose control. And Cain was very, very clear. He expected his plans to work. Okay, I'm going to give God this, and he's going to bless me. I'm going to do what this looks like it's good. Maybe he put the fruits on the top and he put some fluff on the bottom. I don't know what it is, right? But whatever plan he had to live the life that he wanted to live was called out by God, and he was not happy with it. Cain was very displeased that God called him out, that God said no, and Cain got angry. And anger gets built When, because we have lost control of the situation, or we see things slipping out of our hands, or we see relationships, or we see situations failing, or we see things in front of us that are just shaking our world, many times we try to force it to work. And the anger explodes. You see, anger is a real reaction. It's a natural reaction. But there's a reason why the first sign of anger in the Bible was one filled with sin. Because I'm going to differentiate holy anger later. I'm going to differentiate anger that comes when you see genuine injustice. Right? I get genuinely angry when I see adults that harm kids. Like, that's an anger that is godly. Can I get an amen? But there is a reason why the first example of anger that came out in the Bible was a selfish, implosive, and explosive anger that was centered by sin. So again, Cain exploded in anger because what he wanted, he could not get. And what he tried to show was rejected. But let's continue on with verse 6 and 7 to see what God says to Cain about his anger. So in verse 6 through 7, God responds to Cain and says this: "The Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well,'" this is important, "'sin is crouching at the door, and its desires is contrary to you, but you must rule over it.'" God told Cain that his anger was unwarranted, that if he was still in anger, that anger will lead to sin. And God told Cain, "Let go of your anger, or you will sin." And we find the very important truth through verse 6 and 7. That if anger will control us unless we learn to rule over it. And if we don't control our anger, it will not only lead to sin, but that it will lead to destruction. And we will come to find, as the story progresses, that Cain did not listen to God and he stayed in his anger. And that anger will eventually grow to murderous intent, which eventually ends in murder. And that many times, if anger is left unchecked, what it grows to, on one side for some of us, it leads to this fire that persists until we have to let it out. That's an active anger. An active anger looks like revenge and some sort of harm. Number one, it kills us inside. It destroys whatever part of our heart that was good. But number two, it hurts those around us. And we have to be very clear. Cain had nothing against Abel. Abel was his brother. But the fact that Abel was murdered by Cain, as we will read later in this story, shows what unchecked anger does when we allow it to become active. But there's another type of anger that we see, which is passive anger. And when we have passive anger, it settles deep as poison deep in our hearts, and it becomes bitterness. And what passive anger does is it paralyzes us in paranoia, depression, and victimization. The anger unchecked either explodes out of us to hurt people around us, or it sinks deeper to completely and totally form every part of us from the way we view the world to the way we view ourselves and the way we view life. That anger is destructive, and left unchecked, it will destroy those around you, destroy ourselves, or destroy everyone. Anger based on selfishness. Anger based on our worldview. Anger based on us. Left unchecked will ruin our lives. And so we see in verse 8 through 16 the finalization of this passage where Cain, what does he do? It says he spoke to Abel, his brother. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you strength, and you shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and wander on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who finds him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So Cain goes to talk to Abel, and the anger that was seething within, whether he was premeditated or not. Cain, the result of that conversation was that he killed his brother. And anyone that has a sibling knows, a lot of times when you get in a fight, you have a lot of anger in your heart. Would you agree? But to kill your brother, to kill your sibling, to kill your family member, that takes a supernatural intention. It is very unnatural for us to act upon these feelings that we have. And yet Cain does. And we see how much this anger has completely consumed him. To the point, what we talked about before, when God says, "Where is your brother?" What does Cain do? Number one, he deflects and says, "I don't know where my brother is." But obviously God, being God, is able to say very clearly, "You killed your brother." And right after that, you know what Cain says? He says, "My punishment is greater than I can bear." The fact that these are the words of a man who just killed his own brother, that he was feeling sorry for himself, shows what this bitterness does to a person. Some of us, we don't know what anger does to us. But from the example of Cain, I really hope we understand that this is not an instruction. This passage is not just something that is an instruction, like an imitation, something what we have to copy him, but it is actually an instruction and a cautionary tale of how not to live. In this moment, we see that Cain chose anger over obedience. And instead of obeying God and saying, "Okay, God, you have said anger left unchecked leads to destruction. I will lay down this anger to you. And even if I am so frustrated, even if I feel so misunderstood, God, even if, God, it feels so unfair, I will lay down this anger to you because you have said this anger will destroy me." Instead of choosing that path, he said, "No, God, you are unfair. You do not understand me. You are letting these things go." And he chose the anger over obedience. This is a cautionary tale for us. Because some of us, for how much of our life, we have chosen anger. And it might be very, very natural. And I'm going to share a little bit of my story of how I chose anger. But until you choose to see that anger is genuinely destroying you, and that only by laying down that anger to the feet of Christ, you can be set free, the anger will continue to not only consume you, but consume those around you like a whirlpool of fire. Church, how can we lay down our anger? I think the first and most important step, and what I had to do, because my life was filled with seething anger and explosive anger. That's the story of my life. Anger that was like, a fire that's just turned on. And like when people would come next to me, they'll feel this intenseness. Or at times, out of nowhere, I would just explode, right? Like I would be red in the face. I'll see red, there'd be moments I wouldn't really remember. That's how bad it was. For those who struggle with anger, you probably understand. But how did I let go of that anger? It was a very existential realization. And it was that I am not genuinely in control of my world. I'm not in control of what others say to me. I cannot control what happens in life. I can't control even my own desires. How can I control my world? And when that realization hit me, a lot of the causes of my anger, I was set free. When I finally learned that I got angry when I felt something shouldn't be the way it is, and I felt powerless to do anything about it, that was when I felt such deep anger. When someone says something to me that I felt was wrong, I felt that sort of anger. When I worked so hard and I felt I gave my best, but all that resulted was fruitlessness, I felt anger. What the shift was, when someone says something to me, and that was not something I liked. Obviously, it does not feel good, but I realized that's how people are. When I realized no matter how hard I work, sometimes I'm going to fail. That what I can do is work hard, but that result is many times out of my hand. That instead of anger, the first reaction to the failure will be, okay, either do I need to improve? Do I need to change the way I gave my best? Or is this not for me? And my mind and my heart went to more fruitful, productive things instead of seething over the fact that my best was not enough. You see, church, what it means to let go of anger is to let go of your need to control the trajectory of your life and to control how things are called to be. And to trust that God is actually in control. That epiphany changed my life. Some of you guys, after knowing me for a few years now, I have glimpses of anger. Like when something happens that's just not it, I do have anger. But I truly believe that and I'm preaching this because you're my witnesses, that I've never exhibited any anger that was uncontrolled, right? Like that's something that I know now when anger is crouching at the door, right? That allowing that to persist is like allowing a burglar to just chill in my yard, that I need to uproot it right there. It's very, very clear for me. And church, I want to encourage you, if you struggle with anger, if you struggle with frustration, if you struggle with these emotional explosions, we have to know that we need to lay down that need for things to be in a certain way, for our life to be in a certain way. And God will genuinely lead our life in a way that originally we would not have seen, in a way that God will show us if we do genuinely give up that control to Him. And this is the weird thing that happened for me, because people that have anger issues have self-control issues. And my brother and I, we know very clearly one of the favorite things our mom will say is self-control. I mean, it might be our computer time, our TV time, our game. Maybe this is a very thing that parents say, self-control. That I actually, when I learned to lay down control of my life, I was now able to focus my energy on this discipline that will help me channel my focus and my life in a healthy, meaningful, and powerful way. When we give up the need to control the world and the narrative and how people are and this and that, then we focus the control on things that are important. We start to not be affected by others, but we start thinking of how our words, our actions, and what we are can speak to them. So we become someone that goes from always being influenced by the situations around us, because we're so focused now inward in what we need to control, we genuinely start to may have a genuine impact in other people's lives. And in the Greek, there's self-control is rooted in a word called power, entratia. And self-control is self-power. That by giving control of our need to see the trajectory of a world, we genuinely gain self-power to live powerfully in the situations in the way we best can. And that was the secret of Abel. It was not that his flock was so amazing, but to the best of his ability, that was all he had in his control. And he was able to focus faithfully on the day, on the hour, and the minute of what he will do that is right, that is good, and that is the way he should. And so we see antithesis in Abel and how he lived and how his focus was simply by living in accordance to what God commanded and to simply be faithful in what was in his hands. And in there we come to find the essence of learning to lay down our anger and learning to fight a fight that is important. And when you learn to do that, when you gain self-control, then you will gain a genuine, unquenchable passion. That is the fruit, I really believe, and the testimony of my life. It's one of those weird things where I feel like this unending stamina. Like God has given me a passion for the church. But you know, on the flip side, that was my anger. In my teens and my 20s, I was so consumed by anger, I was only completely and totally, that energy was just a whirlpool in my heart. But the moment I laid down that to the Lord, and I was just focused on the daily, the struggle that I had with anger now became a genuine passion and a genuine joy to keep on pushing forward. See, those of us that struggle with anger, there is a hope on the other side of the road. That if you learn to reel your anger in and to lay it down in those moments where you could choose anger or you could choose self-control, that spirit will be that will be your strength in being able to do things with the energy and fire that maybe others around you don't naturally have. That this is actually a God-given gift, but only if you lay down what you feel you deserve and focus on this gift and this fire and this passion that God has given you. I'm telling you, it's such a joy to be free from the daily bouts of anger. And now, I will personally attest, what used to be days filled with just this inner yar, right? Because I still have a lot of physical yar, okay? Like I get hot easy, so I love the winter, hallelujah. I don't like the summer. And I think God is very consistent. He gave me physical yar with also internal emotional yar. But now, instead of this anger inside of me that's burning, because the reason for my anger before was myself, and now the reason for my life is to see people come to Christ, to see people revived, to see people changed, and that's the purpose of my life. That's my worldview, because I laid down my former worldview to God. That fire is now a passion that fuels my ministry and gives me the strength to persist and to go on. Church, I'm going to say it one more time. Controlled anger is constructive, especially when it's a fuel. Would you agree? It's motivation. And when you're angry for the right reason, it gives you the strength to do the right thing. But being controlled by anger is destructive. It will destroy yourself. It will destroy those around you. And at the end of the day, you will be so blinded by your anger. When you are alone, all you will feel is that the world has failed you. And that giving control to God and His Word, that's what leads to self-control. Because we now won't be ruled by our desires or circumstances, but rather now we will be given peace because we know that God is progressing our life. And all we need to focus that fire, that passion, is in how we can live best in the now. Church, again, I will say it. If you are struggling with anger, if it is sin is crouching at your door, this may be the hardest thing to do, maybe by the sunken cost fallacy, because you've lived your whole life angry and you feel as if you can't lay it down. But maybe it is time to lay down that anger at the feet of Christ, to trust Him with your heart, with your life, and to allow Him to heal you from the inside out, and to genuinely allow the true passions of your heart to ignite and for you to live powerfully in a way you've never lived before.